But it says, hear my voice, O God, in my prayer. Preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Now, if you think of that, it's Psalm 64, verse 1. Hear my voice, O God, in my prayer. Preserve my life from fear of the enemy. It's not necessarily saying preserve my life from the enemy. It's saying preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Because you think about that fear, that would be going to a lack of faith, having absolute trust and faith in the Lord. So now you hear the rest of that psalm, 10 verses. Hear my voice, O God, in my prayer. Preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Hide me from the secret counsel of the wicked, from the insurrection. So who are the ones who have insurrections? The enemy. Insurrection of the workers of iniquity, who whet their tongue like a sword and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, even bitter words, that they may shoot in the secret at the perfect. Suddenly do they shoot at him and fear not. They encourage themselves in an evil matter. They commune of laying snares privily. They say, who shall see them? They search out iniquities. They accomplish a diligent search. But the inward thought of every one of them and the heart is deep. But God shall shoot at them with an arrow. Suddenly shall they be wounded. So shall they make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. All that see them shall flee away, and all men shall fear, and shall declare the work of God. So there is that healthy fear of the Lord. The work of God, for they shall wisely consider of his doing. The righteous shall be glad in the Lord, and shall trust in him, and all the upright in heart shall glory. Flipping over to Matthew chapter 10, verse 28 says this, and fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. We'll flip over to James, and before I go into this, I'll expand upon this a little bit more later in the day. At 1 o'clock I'll do another speech, but just to say this, you think of the founding fathers, the men who fought and died for this nation, from its founding all the way up to today. Patriots. You know, all patriots are historians, because naturally you've got to know what you're standing up for truth. Not all historians are patriots, and I think we all know that. But these men and women, they had a sure foundation, especially at the founding of our nation, when it came to this right here, this Bible. Yes, it's good to have some ammunition for your weapons, but it's better to have this ammunition because this is sharper than any double-edged sword, is what the book of Hebrews says. And this will save you from an eternity, as the Bible also explains. But you think about patriotism. What is patriotism? Do you know what it is defined as? What patriotism is defined as? Noah Webster's dictionary from 1828 says this. Patriotism is the love of one's country, the passion which aims to serve one's country, either in defending it from invasion or maintaining its laws and institutions in vigor and purity. Patriotism is the characteristic of a good citizen, the noblest passion that animates a man in the character of a citizen. That's patriotism. And this verse always comes to mind thinking about patriotism. James 1:25. It says this, but whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, and continueth therein, he, being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this man shall be blessed in his deed. Because we love the men and women who fought and died for this nation. We love the type of government that we have at its original founding, not unfortunately what it's become, corruption. But you know that government, this is another subject, but I just feel I have to say this. The term democracy is not correct when explaining our nation. Do you know democracy is never mentioned in the Constitution? Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution says that the United States shall guarantee a republican form of government. And the Pledge of Allegiance says, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, or as President Ronald Reagan said, it's one nation under God, or it's a nation gone under. So God has his rightful place. And you think of all the these great things that we have, but if patriotism stops there, it's not good. You have to look to the one who gave us these good things, who gave us these good men and women, and the mothers and the fathers who raised these good men and women to do the things that they did. So that's some of the words and thoughts that I want to share with you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate the words because
Amen.
back in the 1940s, early 1940s, there was this man who was known as King of the Cowboy Radio. He's the beginning of the cowboy radio shows. And by his own admission, he was known as a drunkard, a womanizer, and he was known to be quite rowdy in his old age of being 24 years old. In fact, one of his hit songs out of his 225 written said, I won't go fishing with you, Wilbur, but I'll go chasing women. That's one of his famous songs, till he found a magical touch of the master's hand. He actually was out of, he's out of Hollywood. Afraid I'm going to lose my voice. He's out of Hollywood and had this radio show, and a young preacher came to him and was being interviewed, and they started, you know how they like to be arguing back and forth, and that young preacher challenged him to come to his crusade, come to his revival, and to see what he's talking about, because he couldn't understand it on the radio. Ma'am, thank you so much. Well, that young preacher, Popeye the Sailor Man, sweet. Felt like spinning. That young preacher said, as John said, I was convicted by the Spirit to do so. And I went to this crusade listening, skeptical of this young man. And when I went home, my wife noticed a stirring of my spirit. And at 3 in the morning, I had to go find this preacher. I knew which hotel he was. I knocked on his door, and there in the hotel, I accepted the love of Jesus Christ. I went back the next day, and I refused the sponsorship of one of the people, which is a beer company. I won't mention Budweiser. But one of the sponsors, which ended up him getting fired from his radio show. And all of a sudden, doors started closing. And he was kind of wondering, dear God, I just accepted you. Why? What's happening? Why am I not being blessed? As we think as human beings. And they said here that he's walking down the streets, kind of distraught. And he'd been in several movies, because he's well known. And said a friend of his ran to him, and they started talking. This friend of his says, well, Pilgrim, I hear you've got religion. And he said, there's no secret what God can do. And that man said, that would be a great song. You need to write it. And he went home, and he said in his journal, said, usually it takes me 2 to 3 hours to write a song like this old house, one that he wrote. But this one came to me. There's no secret what God can do. What he's done for others, he'll do for you. With arms wide open, he's calling you. And he wrote it. And it became the #1 song in the nation. And he started his radio campaign and actually ran for president. Came in 5th. That's pretty good. I've never came in 5th as president. Was that young man by the name of Stuart Hamlin. His friend was none other than the great John Wayne, the Duke that he met online, on the street. And that young preacher was one that we lost a few years back. His name was Billy Graham. Oh. It is no secret what God can do. The changes that he made and the things that, coming out boldly for Christ. He never compromised one. He threw away his whiskey bottle. He threw away his everything. His chasing women. He fell in love with his wife again, he said. And she forgave me for my runaround ways. Wow. You know, for some reason that ties in, and I mentioned to you, if I may, I'm not bragging, but I'm just so thrilled, because I was kind of distraught about Caleb not being able to make it, but I understand. And I got an email, looked at it was from the Camp Chase Gazette, and it said, congratulations, your article on Resurrection Morning has been published. And I looked at it, and the very first part of it is the Bible, 4 verses. They hardly ever do that. They always edit the daylights out of my hidden preaching. I guess they could sleep that day. But it made me think boldly before Christ to go. And if I may, I'll share this story, then let you wrap everything up for us. Okay. But it was November 1863. He was in Company A of the 3rd Virginia. It was a winter encampment on the Great Rapidan, and on the northern side and the southern side, this little ribbon of water ran between them. And there were pickets here and pickets there. And on August of 1863, after Gettysburg, General Lee wrote the order, General Order 127, where he, I believe I may be wrong on the number, but where he said, soldiers, we have sinned against Almighty God. We have taken upon our shoulders what he needs to be doing. And so this young man, Luke was his name, decided and came up forward to Christ. Well, it said there at the Rapidan, in November the water was cold, but he had conviction of the Spirit that he needed to give an outward sign of an inward change. So he asked, I believe his name was Reverend Ragland, it was, if he would baptize him. And he said, wait a minute, son. He said, we're here, well, Lord, you can see that picket over there, that's Union picket, both in winter encampment. If we go out there, we're going to be shot at. He said, but if I die in battle, I want people to know that I died as a Christian. And after much conversation, they consented to put him out there, and they said that he slowly stepped out with the parson beside of him. The Union noticed the activity, and they started circling around, and said his friends broke up into a fine Christian song. And then he went to the water, and they started singing. And as they baptized him, the Union soldiers saw what was happening. They tossed down their guns, and they came forward singing right beside the river as this young man took off the old coat and put on the new. Boldness in Christ. I'm wondering how many on that side saw the bravery and the love he had of Christ and came forward themselves. How many on the other side came forward all because of a 19-year-old boy who was saved and said, I want to show the world that I follow Jesus. My goodness. We have a commission. We have a great commission. And I'm sorry. In 1858, a lady wrote from Maysville, Kentucky. She wrote a poem. The poem's name was "The Kentuckian Bows to None But God." And these rich millionaires that play all these sports, and they kneel among our sacred, I have totally disbanded anything on my to an association with that, because this is America under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have to understand we are going to have to take a bigger stand and stand up for our beliefs. If you don't, Gregory.
I'd like to say just a moment, thoughts for someone else. I had dinner with David last night, in which I've known him for years. He's been a great inspiration to me. And I learned that we have similarities. I go to these Confederate, I got a passion for Confederate events, and I'm calling an Uncle Tom from my own community and my own relatives. And I try to explain I'm just going out spreading my internal love and demonstrating freedom. I learned about David, his family labels him doing what I do as a racist. He's a racist. And I thought about Jesus Christ and his kinfolks and his brothers and sisters feeling that Jesus is a little bit mentally ill. That's just Jesus. You know, going out showing love at all costs. And I just want to say, please pray for David, and hopefully his family come around to his conviction, his path, mine. They're just going to have to live with it. I would also like to say thank you for speaking to my wife last night from the dinner. But she told me to tell you, David has no good alibi for you because both of y'all are the same cloth.
Thank goodness, and I'll take that $20 for a leave. Thank you, brother. I just love the man, and this is what's so interesting. No matter where you go or reenact, and I travel the country. I was in even Greeley, Colorado, the 12th most liberal city in the nation. And guess what? I had 2,500, a big circus tent there, and people, what's he gonna say? I got a standing ovation. Lee. They didn't understand. They said, we never heard that about Lee. He was a Christian like us. Yep. Because he boldly stood for Christ and boldly stood up for what he believed.
Yes.
And that's what we have to do.
Yes.
I'm not going to back down in my belief. You're not going to back down. You won't. I mean, look what you're putting on. My goodness. Are we not blessed and highly favored by the great Almighty?
And very discriminating.
Very. I would like, my dear brother, I gotta be, one of the great joys of coming to Alabama a few years back and meeting this young man. And one of my favorite pictures is you're standing, what was it, a Jenny stick?
Janie Furnace, sir.
Jenny Ford?
Janie Furnace.
Jenny Furnace.
Yes, sir.
Oh, has she? And he's standing